My name's Jake, and I work nights at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Nothing glamorous, just loading trucks, moving boxes, the kind of job that pays the bills while you figure out what you actually want to do with your life. I'm 26, been doing this gig for about 8 months now, and honestly, the worst part wasn't the work itself. It was that damn walk home. See, the warehouse is in this industrial area where nobody really lives. It's about 1.5 miles to my apartment, and most of that stretch is along Riverside Drive. This long, straight road with no sidewalk, just a narrow shoulder between the asphalt and a chain link fence. During the day, it's busy enough, but at midnight, dead. Maybe one car every few minutes. Tops. I'd gotten used to the routine. Clock out at 12, buy an energy drink from the vending machine. Start walking. Headphones in, hood up, just zone out for the 20-minute trek home. Never had any problems. Hell, I actually like the quiet. Gave me time to think, to decompress from 8 hours of mindless labor. But that Tuesday night in October, something was different. It started normal enough. Punched out right at midnight. Grabbed my usual Red Bull, stepped outside into that crisp autumn air. The kind of cold that makes you walk a little faster, you know? I fired up my playlist and started down Riverside like always. I was maybe 5 minutes in when I noticed the headlights coming up behind me. Nothing unusual. Cars pass me all the time. But this one was moving slow. Really slow. Like uncomfortably slow. I stepped further onto the shoulder to give it plenty of room. But as it crawled past me, I got this weird feeling. It was a silver sedan. Small, maybe a Corolla or something similar. Nothing special about it, except for how the driver was just staring straight ahead. Not even a glance in my direction. Just dead-eyed focus on the road ahead. Hands at 10 and 2. Going maybe 15 miles per hour on a road where the speed limit's 45. I thought it was weird. But hey, maybe it was some old person who shouldn't be driving at night. Or someone on their phone being overly cautious. Whatever. The car disappeared around the bend ahead. And I kept walking. That's when it got strange. Maybe 2 minutes later, I see headlights coming toward me from the opposite direction. Same car. Same silver sedan. Same slow crawl. Same dead-eyed driver staring straight ahead like I wasn't even there. It passed me going the other way. And I actually stopped walking for a second, watching its taillights disappear behind me. What the hell? I mean, okay, maybe the guy realized he was going the wrong way and turned around. It happens, but something about it felt off. The way he was driving, the way he didn't even acknowledge my existence. It was like I was watching some kind of robot. I shook it off and kept walking. Put my music back up, tried to focus on the lyrics, but I couldn't shake this creeping sensation that something wasn't right. And then it happened again. Same car, coming from behind again, same impossibly slow speed. This time I turned around as it approached, trying to get a better look at the driver. But the headlights were too bright, and all I could make out was the silhouette. Just a person-shaped shadow behind the wheel, motionless except for the slight movements needed to keep the car straight. The sedan passed me a third time, and my heart started beating a little faster. This wasn't normal. This wasn't someone who was lost or confused. This was deliberate. I picked up my pace, but tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe there were two similar cars. Or maybe I was losing track of time and directions. But deep down I knew better. The fourth pass confirmed it. Same car, same driver, same slow, predatory crawl. But this time, as it passed me, I could swear I saw the driver's head turn just slightly in my direction. Not enough to make eye contact, but enough that I fucking knew, that this wasn't random. This person was circling me, like a shark. My mouth went dry. I pulled out my earbuds and started looking around, trying to figure out what to do. The road stretched out in both directions, empty except for that chain link fence on one side and a drainage ditch on the other. No places to hide, no stores to duck into, no other people around. Just me, the darkness, and whoever was in that car. That's when I heard the engine again. I spun around and saw the headlights approaching from behind for the 5th time. But now the car was moving even slower, barely above an idle. I could hear the engine puttering along, this low, mechanical breathing that seemed to match my own panicked heartbeat. About 50 feet ahead of me, the car pulled over the shoulder and stopped. The engine kept running. The headlights stayed on, but the car just sat there, waiting. I froze. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like concrete. I stood there staring at those taillights, trying to convince myself that maybe the driver was just having car trouble, maybe they needed help, maybe this was all some huge misunderstanding. But then I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The brake lights weren't on. The car was in park, engine running, but there were no brake lights, which meant the driver's foot wasn't on the brake. It meant they were ready to move at any second. That's when I ran. Not forward toward the car. Hell no. I turned around and started running back the way I came, my work boots slapping against the asphalt. Behind me, I heard the car door open. I didn't look back. I just ran, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my backpack bouncing against my spine. I could hear footsteps on the pavement behind me, but I didn't dare turn around to see how close they were. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, I reached a side street I'd never noticed before, some narrow residential road that branched off Riverside. I took it without thinking, plunging into a maze of small houses and apartment buildings, using parked cars and overgrown bushes as cover. I must have spent the next hour zigzagging through side streets and alleys, taking the most indirect route possible back to my building. Every time I saw headlights, I ducked behind a dumpster or pressed myself against a wall until they passed. My heart didn't stop pounding until I was inside my apartment with the door locked and the chain engaged. I went straight to my bedroom window, the one that faces the street, and carefully peered through the blinds. The silver sedan was parked directly across from my building. No headlights now, but I could see the outline of someone still sitting in the driver's seat. I watched for maybe 20 minutes, hoping they'd give up and leave. But the car didn't move. The driver didn't get out. They just waited. Eventually, I forced myself to go to bed, but I barely slept. Every sound from the street made me jump. Car doors, engine starting, even the neighbor's cat knocking over trash cans. When I finally drifted off around 4 in the morning, I had nightmares about being chased down endless dark roads by slow-moving headlights. I woke up around noon and immediately checked the window. The car was gone. I spent that whole day trying to convince myself it had been some kind of weird one-off thing. Maybe it was a drunk driver who got confused, or someone playing a prank, or hell, maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Lack of sleep and too much caffeine can make you paranoid, right? But that night, walking to work, I kept looking over my shoulder. Every car that passed made me tense up. I found myself memorizing license plates, noting the color and model of every vehicle I saw. By the time I got to the warehouse, I was exhausted from the constant vigilance. My co-worker Danny noticed I seemed off. "You look like shit, man," he said as we were loading a truck around 2 a.m. "Everything okay?" I thought about telling him what happened, but it sounded crazy even in my own head. What was I going to say? Hey, some guy drove past me a few times and then followed me home? It wasn't like anything actually happened. No one threatened me. No one touched me. For all I knew, it really had been some kind of misunderstanding. Yeah, just tired. I told Danny. Didn't sleep well. But as my shift wound down, that familiar dread started creeping back in. The walk home. Riverside Drive. What if the car came back? I decided to take a different route. Instead of going straight down Riverside, I'd cut through the industrial complex and take the long way around through the residential area. It would add maybe 10 minutes to my walk, but it felt safer. So at midnight, I clocked out and headed in the opposite direction from usual. The industrial complex was even darker and more isolated than Riverside, but at least it had more places to hide if I needed to. Loading docks, Parked trucks, side buildings, plenty of cover. I was about halfway through the complex when I saw them. Headlights, moving slowly between the buildings. That same predatory crawl I'd seen the night before. My stomach dropped. It was too dark and too far away to make out the car clearly, but something about the movement pattern, the speed, the deliberate way it was searching, I knew it was the same person. I ducked behind a parked semi and waited. The headlights swept across the area where I'd been walking, paused, then continued on. After a few minutes, they disappeared around a corner, and I thought maybe I was safe. I was wrong. As I continued through the complex, trying to stay in the shadows, I kept seeing those headlights. Never close enough to make out the car clearly, but always there, always searching. It was like being hunted by some kind of mechanical predator that could see in the dark. By the time I made it to the residential streets, I was pretty sure I'd lost them. I took an even more circuitous route home than the night before, cutting through parks and alleys, doubling back on myself multiple times. When I finally reached my building, I spent a good 5 minutes hiding behind a neighbor's hedge, watching the street for any sign of the silver sedan. Nothing. The coast seemed clear. I made it up to my apartment and immediately went to the window. The street was empty except for the usual parked cars belonging to residents. I actually felt a little silly for being so paranoid. That feeling lasted about 10 minutes. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard an engine start up outside. Not unusual. People come and go at all hours in the city, but something about the sound made me go back to the window. The silver sedan was parked 3 blocks down, just barely visible under a broken streetlight. As I watched, it slowly drove past my building. The driver's head turned to look up at the windows. Then it continued to the end of the block, made a U-turn, and drove past again in the other direction. This time, the car stopped directly in front of my building. The engine cut off. The headlights went dark. And for the second night in a row, someone sat in that car watching my apartment. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it, but I couldn't stop myself from peeking out every few minutes. The car was always there. Sometimes the interior light would flick on for a second, just long enough for me to see the silhouette of someone moving around inside, then go dark again. Around 4 a.m., I must have dozed off in my chair. When I woke up a few hours later, the car was gone. This went on for over a week. Every night after work, no matter which route I took home, that silver sedan would find me. Sometimes it would tail me from a distance. Sometimes it would be waiting when I got to my apartment. Once, I came home to find it parked in the exact same spot I always parked my own car, like they were trying to send me a message. I started varying my routine more. Different routes, different times, even staying at work later or leaving earlier. Nothing worked. Whoever this was, they seemed to know my schedule better than I did. The worst part was that I never got a clear look at the driver. The windows were always too tinted, or the lighting was wrong, or they were just far enough away that I could only make out a vague human shape. It was like being stalked by a ghost. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I tell them? That someone was driving on public roads and parking on public streets? That I felt like I was being followed without any direct threats or illegal behavior? I doubted they'd take it seriously, so I started taking precautions. I bought a baseball bat and kept it by my bed. I installed one of those security cameras that sends alerts to your phone. I even looked into getting a restraining order, but you need to know who you're restraining, and I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted. That's when things escalated. It was a Friday night, almost 2 weeks after this whole nightmare started. I'd gotten into the habit of calling my friend Marcus when I left work, staying on the phone with him during the walk home. Having someone else aware of where I was and what was happening made me feel a little safer. You still sure you don't want to crash at my place for a few nights? Marcus asked as I walked down a side street about halfway home. This shit sounds crazy, man. What if this guy's actually dangerous? I can't let some random psycho drive me out of my own apartment, I said, but honestly, I was starting to consider it. The constant stress was wearing me down. I wasn't sleeping well, I was jumping at every sound, and I'd started seeing silver sedans everywhere, most of which turned out to be completely innocent people just trying to get to work or the grocery store. Just saying, "My couch is always available," Marcus said. "You don't have to." He was interrupted by the sound of an engine behind me. I turned around and saw the familiar headlights approaching. "Shit," I whispered into the phone. "It's him." "The car guy?" "Yeah, I'm gonna hang up and call you when I get home, okay?" "Jake, don't hang up. Stay on the line." But I'd already ended the call. I don't know why. Maybe I was embarrassed about how scared I sounded, or maybe I just needed to focus on getting home safely. Either way, it was a mistake. The car followed me for the next 6 blocks, maintaining that same slow, menacing pace. But this time was different. This time, when I turned onto my street, the car didn't just drive past or park across from my building. It pulled into my building's parking lot. My blood went cold. This was my home, my safe space. And this person, this stranger who'd been terrorizing me for 2 weeks, was now in my parking lot, maybe 20 feet from my front door. I stopped at the edge of the lot, trying to figure out what to do. The sedan had parked in a visitor's spot near the back, engine still running, headlights illuminating the brick wall of my building. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew they were watching me. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "You okay? Call me back." I was about to respond when I heard a car door slam. The driver had gotten out. I still couldn't see them clearly. They were in the shadow between 2 parked cars, but I could hear footsteps on the asphalt. Slow, deliberate steps moving in my direction. Every instinct I had told me to run. But where? This was my home. These were my neighbors sleeping peacefully in their apartments, completely unaware that some psychopath was stalking one of their own in the parking lot. I decided to make a run for the front entrance. It was maybe 30 yards away, and I had my keys ready. If I could get inside the building, I'd be safe. The front door locked automatically, and you needed a key to get in. I sprinted across the parking lot, my boots echoing off the concrete walls. Behind me, I heard the footsteps pick up pace, but I didn't look back. I just focused on the entrance, on getting inside, on... The front door was propped open. Someone had wedged a small stone between the door and the frame, keeping it from closing completely. In all the months I'd lived here, I'd never seen that door propped open. The building management was obsessed with security, always sending out notices about keeping the entrance locked. But there it was, open, like someone had prepared for this exact moment. I hesitated for just a second, and that second was too long. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around and finally, got a clear look at the person who'd been hunting me. It was a woman, middle-aged, maybe 45, with short brown hair and these incredibly intense eyes. She was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, nothing threatening about her appearance. But there was something deeply wrong with her expression. She looked at me the way you might look at an interesting insect you caught in a jar. "Jake," she said, and hearing my name in her voice made my skin crawl. "We need to talk." I jerked away from her grip and stumbled backward. "Who the hell are you? What do you want?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Rebecca. I've been trying to get your attention for weeks." By stalking me, by following me home every night. "I had to be sure," she said, taking a step closer. "I had to make sure you were the right one." "The right one for what?" Her smile widened, and I noticed her teeth were stained yellow, like she was a heavy smoker or coffee drinker. "You look just like him, you know? Same height, same build, same way of walking, even the same backpack." "Like who? What are you talking about?" "My son," she said, and suddenly her voice got very soft, very calm. "You look just like my son, David." A chill ran down my spine. "Lady, I think you're confused. I don't know any David, and I'm not your son." "Of course you're not," she said, laughing like I'd made a joke. "David's dead. He died 3 years ago." She reached into her jacket, and I tensed up, ready to run or fight, or do whatever I had to do. But what she pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a photograph. Even in the dim light from the parking lot security lamps, I could see it clearly. It was a picture of a young man who looked exactly like me. Not similar, not kind of close. Exactly like me. Same face, same hair, same everything. It was like looking at a picture of myself that I'd never taken. "You see," Rebecca said, holding the photo up next to my face. "You could be twins." I stared at the picture, my mind racing. It had to be a coincidence. People have doppelgangers all the time, right? There are only so many ways a human face can be arranged. That's weird, but it doesn't mean anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "People look alike sometimes. That doesn't give you the right to..." "He used to walk home from work too," she interrupted. "Same route you take, down Riverside Drive. Every night at midnight, just like you." My mouth went dry. "How do you know about my route?" "Because I used to pick him up sometimes," she said, her voice getting dreamy distant. "When the weather was bad, or when he was tired, I'd drive out there and give him a ride home. He'd always be so grateful. 'Thanks, Mom,' he'd say. 'You're the best.'" She was staring at me with this intense, hungry look, like she was trying to memorize every detail of my face. "David worked at the warehouse too," she continued. "Same shift, same job. Loading trucks, moving boxes. He was saving up money for college, just like you are." I hadn't told anyone I was saving up for college. Hell, I barely admitted it to myself. How could she possibly know that? "I've been watching you," she said, answering my unspoken question. "Learning about you. You're so much like him, Jake. So very much like my David." "Look," I said, backing toward the building in trance. "I'm sorry about your son, I really am. But I'm not him and I can't help you. You need to talk to someone, get some help." "I don't need help," she snapped, and for the first time, I saw real anger in her eyes. "I need David, and you're going to help me get him back." That's when I ran. I bolted through the propped open door and up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Behind me, I could hear her following, her footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. "Jake," she called out, "don't run from me. I'm your mother." I made it to the 3rd floor and fumbled with my keys, tried to unlock my apartment door while listening to her getting closer. Finally, the lock turned, and I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me and engaging every lock I had, the deadbolt, the chain, even the little sliding latch that I'd never used before. I pressed my back against the door, breathing hard, listening for any sound from the hallway. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Then I heard a soft knock. "Jake!" Rebecca's voice was muffled by the door, but I could hear the false sweetness in it. "I know you're scared, honey, but I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." I didn't respond. The knocking continued, soft and persistent. I brought some of David's things. I thought you might want to see them. Photos, his favorite books, some clothes that might fit you. I stayed silent, my phone in my hand, ready to call 911 if she tried to break in. "He had the same apartment as you know," she said, and I could hear her moving around in the hallway. "Same layout, same view of the street. I still have his key." That made me freeze. She had a key to an identical apartment? How was that possible? "He loved it here," she continued, her voice getting closer to the door. "Always said it felt like home. I bet you feel the same way, don't you, Jake?" I heard something metallic scraping against the door, like she was trying to slide something under the gap at the bottom. I crept closer and saw a piece of paper being pushed through. It was another photograph. This one showed the same young man, David, but he was sitting in what looked exactly like my living room. Same couch, same coffee table, same view out the window. But that was impossible. My apartment was supposedly unique, part of a small building that had been converted from an old factory. Unless I ran to my window and looked down at the parking lot. The silver sedan was still there, but now I could see Rebecca standing next to it, looking up at my window. She waved when she saw me, like we were old friends. My phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hi, honey." Rebecca's voice said to the speaker, "I can see you up there. You look just like David did when he used to wave at me from that same window. How did you get this number?" "Same way I got everything else about you," she said. "I've been very thorough, Jake. I know where you work, where you shop, what you eat for breakfast. I know you call your friend Marcus every Friday night, and I know you're 3 months behind on your student loan payments." I hung up and immediately called 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's a woman stalking me," I said. "She's been following me for weeks, and now she's outside my apartment building. I think she might be dangerous." "Is she threatening you or trying to break in?" I looked out the window. Rebecca was still standing by her car, but now she was holding up another photograph. This one too distant for me to make out clearly. Not exactly, but she's been harassing me, and she knows personal information about me that she shouldn't know. She says I look like her dead son. "Sir, we can send an officer to check it out, but if she's not on your property or making direct threats, there may not be much we can do." By the time the cops arrived 20 minutes later, Rebecca and her car were gone. The officer who came to take my statement was polite, but clearly skeptical. I showed him the photographs that had been slipped under my door, told him about the weeks of being followed, explained about the personal information this woman somehow knew about me. "Have you ever heard of a David who used to live in this building?" he asked. "No, but I've only been here 8 months. "And you're sure you've never met this woman before? Never had any interaction with her or her son?" "I'm positive. I remember someone who looked that much like me." The officer nodded and wrote some notes. "We'll file a report and increase patrols in this area for the next few nights. If you see her again, call us immediately. In the meantime, you might want to consider staying with friends or family for a while." After he left, I called Marcus. "Pack a bag," he said before I could even explain what happened. "I'm coming to get you right now." I spent the weekend at Marcus's place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time we left the apartment, to get food, to go to a movie, just to walk around the block, I found myself scanning for silver sedans. I saw them everywhere, but none of them seemed to be following us. Marcus was great about it. Never made me feel like I was being paranoid or crazy, but I could tell he was worried. He kept asking if I thought about calling in sick to work, maybe taking a few days off until the police could figure out who this woman was. "I can't let her control my life," I said. "If I start hiding from her, where does it end?" But honestly, I was terrified of going back to work. The walk home, Riverside Drive, the isolated industrial complex. It all felt like a trap now. Sunday night, I made Marcus drive me to work and pick me up afterward. We didn't see any sign of Rebecca or her car, and I started to think maybe the police visit had scared her off. I was wrong. Monday night, Marcus had to work late, so I took an Uber to the warehouse and planned to call another one for the ride home. But when my shift ended at midnight, every rideshare app said there were no drivers available in my area. Budget cuts had eliminated most of the late-night coverage in the industrial district. I could have called Marcus, but he lived 40 minutes away, and I knew he had an early meeting the next morning. I could have asked Danny or one of my other coworkers for a ride, but most of them live in the opposite direction, so I decided to walk. I told myself I was being smart about it. I'd stick to well-lit areas, stay on main roads, keep my phone ready to call for help. It would be fine. Rebecca probably wasn't even watching anymore. I made it about half a mile before I saw the headlights. Different car this time. A dark SUV instead of the silver sedan. But the same slow, predatory movement. The same sense of being hunted. My heart started racing. I pulled out my phone to call 911. But when I looked at the screen, I had no signal. That had never happened before on Riverside Drive. The SUV pulled up alongside me and stopped. The passenger window rolled down, and Rebecca leaned across from the driver's seat. "Get in, David," she said. I'm not David, I said, backing away from the car, and I'm not getting in that car with you. You've been a very bad boy, she said, and her voice had changed. It was colder now, more authoritative, like a parent scolding a child. Running away from home, staying with strangers, ignoring your mother's calls. You're not my mother. Of course I am, she said, reaching across to unlock the passenger door. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. I know everything about you. The door swung open. Get in the car, David. We're going home. I ran, but this time she followed in the SUV, keeping pace with me as I sprinted down Riverside Drive. The engine rumbled right next to me, and through the open passenger window, I could hear her talking. You can't run forever, sweetie, she said, her voice almost sing-song. I've got all night, and I know exactly where you're going. She was right. There was nowhere else to go except my apartment, and she already knew where that was. I veered off Riverside and cut through the industrial complex, hoping the narrow roads between buildings would force her to abandon the chase. But the SUV was smaller than I'd expected, and she navigated the tight turns like she'd driven this route 100 times before. Maybe she had. I was starting to get winded, and she was still right there, matching my speed perfectly. Every time I slowed down, she slowed down. Every time I changed direction, she anticipated it. That's when I realized she wasn't just following me. She was hurting me. Every turn I made, every route I chose, led me further from helping deeper into the maze of abandoned buildings and empty lots that surrounded the industrial complex. I was being driven towards something, but I didn't know what. I found out when I reached the dead end. It was a loading dock behind an old factory, completely hidden from the main roads. The kind of place where someone could scream and no one would hear them. The SUV's headlights illuminated a chain link gate that blocked the only way out. I was trapped. Rebecca got out of the car slowly, like she had all the time in the world. That's enough running, she said. Come here, David. I told you I'm not David. I shouted, pressing my back against the lock gate. Your son is dead. I'm sorry he's dead, but I'm not him. He's not dead, she said, walking toward me with that same terrible smile. He's just confused. You've been confused for a long time, haven't you, sweetie? She was close enough now that I could see her clearly in the headlights. Her eyes were completely wrong. Too bright, too intense, like someone had turned up the contrast on them. You've been pretending to be someone else, she continued. Playing this game where you have a different name and a different life. But games have to end eventually. She reached into her jacket again, and this time what she pulled out was a photograph. It was a syringe. This will help you remember, she said. Help you remember who you really are. I grabbed the chain link fence and started climbing. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the metal. But adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I made it about halfway up before she grabbed my leg and yanked me down. I hit the ground hard, my vision going white for a second. When it cleared, Rebecca was kneeling next to me, the syringe in her hand. "Shoo," she whispered, brushing my hair back from my forehead. "It's okay, David. Mommy's here." The needle was inches from my arm when I heard the sirens. Red and blue lights flashed against the buildings around us, and suddenly the loading dock was full of police cars. Officers were shouting, surrounding Rebecca, telling her to drop the weapon and get away from me. I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed with Marcus sitting next to me, looking worried as hell. "Thank God," he said when he saw my eyes open. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I said. My whole body ached, and there was a bandage on my arm where the syringe had apparently nicked me. "What happened? How did the police find me?" "Your phone," Marcus said. "You but dialed me during the chase, and I could hear everything. You running, that crazy woman talking, the car engine. I called 911, and they traced your location. Is she—" I couldn't finish the question. "In custody?" Marcus said, and probably headed for a psychiatric evaluation. The cop said she had a whole shrine to her dead son in the back of that SUV. Photos, clothes, even some kind of shrine set up with candles and shit. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't gotten that accidental phone call. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "Something the police found out about that building you live in." I opened my eyes. "What about it?" "Rebecca's son David really did live there. Same apartment as yours, about 4 years ago. He worked the same shift at the same warehouse, took the same route home every night." A chill ran down my spine. "What happened to him?" "He disappeared one night walking home from work. Police never found the body, but they assumed he'd been mugged or hit by a car or something. Case went cold after a few months." I stared at the ceiling, trying to process this information. So she wasn't completely delusional. Her son really did exist, really did live my exact life. "Yeah," Marcus said. "But Jake..." "Here's the thing that's really fucked up." I talked to the detective on the case, and he said Rebecca was never really a suspect in David's disappearance. She reported him missing, cooperated with the investigation, seemed genuinely distraught. "So what changed?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. It was 11:45 p.m., and I had just finished my night shift. On my walk home, a man in a baseball cap stepped out from between two parked cars and asked if I knew how to get to Pine Street. His tone was polite, almost friendly, but something in his voice made me uneasy. I gave him quick directions and kept walking. 2 blocks later, he was in front of me again, coming from the opposite direction, smiling, as if we hadn't spoken at all. This time, he asked the exact same question, same words, same tone. I didn't answer. I walked faster. He didn't follow, but when I turned into my street, he was standing at the corner, waiting. That was 3 weeks ago. I still can't sleep properly. And I need to tell someone about what happened next. Look, I'm not the paranoid type. I'm 26, work as a security guard at a downtown office building, and I've lived in this city my whole life. I've seen plenty of weird stuff. Drunk college kids, homeless people having conversations with invisible friends, the occasional tweaker wandering around at all hours. You learn to mind your own business and keep walking. But this was different. So like I said, it was almost midnight on a Thursday. I just clocked out for my shift and was walking the 8 blocks home to my apartment. The route takes me through a pretty decent neighborhood. Not fancy, but not sketchy either. Tree-lined streets, old brownstones, the kind of place where people actually know their neighbors' names. I was about 4 blocks from home when this guy stepped out from between 2 parked cars. Not jumped out, nothing dramatic like that. Just emerged, like he'd been waiting there. He was maybe in his 40s, average height, wearing dark jeans and a navy baseball cap pulled low. His face was ordinary, the kind you forget 5 minutes later. Pale skin, clean-shaven, maybe a little thin. Nothing threatening about his appearance at all. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was perfectly normal. Polite, even. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" Now, Pine Street runs parallel to my street, about 6 blocks north. It's a main thoroughfare, plenty of shops and restaurants. Easy enough to find if you know the area. "Yeah, sure," I said, pointing in the right direction. "Head straight up to Maple. Take a left, then it's about 4 blocks that way. You'll see the big intersection." He nodded, said, "Thank you," and that was it. I kept walking. But here's the thing, and this is what I keep coming back to. There was something about his tone that didn't sit right, like he was reading from a script. The words were normal, but the delivery felt off. Rehearsed, maybe. Still, I didn't think much of it. People ask for directions all the time, right? I put my earbuds back in and kept walking home. 2 blocks later, I'm crossing the street when I see someone coming toward me on the sidewalk. I glance up and it's the same guy, same baseball cap, same clothes, walking from the opposite direction like he's been coming from Pine Street this whole time. As he gets closer, he makes eye contact and gives me this little smile. Not creepy or anything, just a normal, friendly smile. Then he stops right in front of me. "Excuse me," he says in exactly the same tone as before. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" The exact same words, the exact same inflection, like he was playing back a recording. I just stared at him for a second. My brain was trying to process what was happening. Had he gotten lost? Forgotten already? But he was coming from the direction I'd sent him in, and Pine Street was only a few minutes' walk from where we'd first met. I started to say, but something in his expression stopped me. He was looking at me with this expectant, patient smile, like we'd never met before in our lives. I felt this weird chill run down my spine. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. An instinct telling me that something was wrong here. "Sorry, I don't know," I said and kept walking. Fast. I didn't look back, but I could feel him watching me. I turned the corner onto my street and finally let myself glance over my shoulder. The sidewalk behind me was empty, but when I looked ahead toward my apartment building, there he was, standing on the corner under a streetlight maybe 50 yards away, just standing there facing my direction, waiting. The logical part of my brain kicked in. Maybe he lived in the neighborhood. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe I was being paranoid. But as I got closer to my building, I could see him more clearly. He wasn't looking around, wasn't checking his phone, wasn't doing any of the normal things people do when they're waiting for someone or trying to get their bearings. He was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me approach. I walked past him to get to my front door, and I swear I could feel his eyes tracking me the entire time. But when I fumbled with my keys and glanced back, he was gone. I got inside, locked the door behind me, and went straight to my window. I live on the second floor, so I have a decent view of the street. I looked down, and there was no one there. I told myself I was overreacting. Weird coincidence, nothing more. I had a beer, watched some TV, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the whole thing. The next night, I worked a different shift and got home around 9 p.m., different route, different time, different everything. I was walking down a side street I rarely use when I saw him again. This time, he was standing next to a bus stop, but there was no bus in sight. He saw me before I saw him, and as I got closer, he stepped away from the stop and blocked my path. "Excuse me," he said, with that same scripted politeness. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" My blood went cold. The exact same question, the exact same tone. But we were nowhere near Pine Street now. We were at least 10 blocks away, in a completely different part of the neighborhood. "No," I said immediately, not breaking stride. "Sorry," but he moved to stay in front of me, not aggressively, just persistently, like he was hurting me. "Are you sure?" he asked, and this time there was something different in his voice. Still polite, but with an edge underneath. "I think you might know." I stepped around him and kept walking, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me for about half a block, then they stopped. When I got home, I went straight to my computer and looked up Pine Street on Google Maps. I wanted to see if there was something about that location that made sense, a hospital, a police station, something that might explain why someone would be so insistent about finding it. But Pine Street was just a regular street. Restaurants, a couple of shops, some apartment buildings. Nothing special. That weekend, I decided to walk down Pine Street myself, just to see what was there. Maybe I'd missed something obvious. It was a Saturday afternoon, plenty of people around, bright sunshine. Safe as could be, I walked the entire length of the street, from one end to the other. Nothing that would explain why someone would be so desperate to find it. As I was walking back toward the main intersection, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was a bulletin board outside one of the coffee shops, covering the usual stuff, apartment listings, tutoring services, lost pet flyers. But mixed in with all the normal notices were about 6 or 7 identical flyers. They were simple, just text on white paper. All they said was, "Looking for directions to Pine Street. Will pay for accurate information. Call for details." And then a phone number. The flyers looked fresh, like they'd been put up recently. And they were all in the same handwriting, neat, careful block letters. I took a picture of one of them with my phone. But I didn't call the number. Something about those flyers felt deeply wrong. Over the next week, I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. Walking to work, walking home, running errands, I began to see the same flyer posted in different locations around the neighborhood. Always the same message. Always the same handwriting. And I started seeing it more often, too. Not every day, but maybe 3 or 4 times that week. Always in different locations. Always asking the same question. Sometimes he'd approach other people. I saw him stop a woman walking her dog, an elderly man waiting for the bus, a teenager on his bike. Always the same polite tone. Always the same question. But here's what really freaked me out. I started following the people he talked to from a distance, just to see what happened. The woman with the dog gave him directions, pointed him in the right direction, and went about her business. Normal interaction. But about 20 minutes later, I saw her again, walking back the way she'd come, looking confused and agitated. She kept checking her phone, looking around like she was lost. The elderly man had a similar reaction. After talking to the guy in the baseball cap, he seemed disoriented, kept stopping and starting like he couldn't remember where he was going. The teenager was the worst. After giving directions, he just stood there for about 5 minutes, staring at nothing. Then he got back on his bike and rode in circles around the same block 4 times before finally leaving. It was like talking to this guy was scrambling people's sense of direction, their ability to navigate, like he was somehow feeding off their knowledge of the area and leaving them confused in return. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know, but I was watching it happen over and over again. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was coming home from work, taking a route I'd never used before, trying to avoid running into him. But as I turned onto a street I'd never been down in my life, there he was, standing in front of a house with a for sale sign in the yard, looking up at the windows like he was considering buying the place. But when he saw me, he walked over with that same patient smile. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" And that's when I lost it. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted at him. "I've given you directions 3 times. You've asked me the same goddamn question for 2 weeks. What is your problem?" His expression didn't change at all. He just stood there, smiling that polite smile like I hadn't said anything. "I'm sorry," he said in that same scripted tone. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" I pulled out my phone and started recording him. "I'm calling the police," I said. "You're stalking me." But as soon as he saw the phone, his whole demeanor changed. The smile disappeared, and for the first time, I saw something real in his expression. Something angry. "You shouldn't do that," he said, and his voice was completely different now. Flat, cold, threatening. I kept recording. "Why not? What are you going to do about it?" He took a step closer, and I could see his eyes under the brim of his cap for the first time. They were pale, almost colorless, and there was something deeply wrong with them. Not physically wrong, but empty, like looking into the windows of an abandoned house. "You don't understand," he said. "I need to get to Pine Street." "Then use GPS like everyone else," I said, backing away from him. He shook his head slowly. "That's not how it works." "How it works?" But he didn't answer. He just turned around and walked away, disappearing between 2 parked cars just like the first time I'd seen him. I went home and watched the video. I'd recorded about 20 times. His voice, his words, everything seemed normal when I played it back. But there was something about his eyes that made me feel sick every time I saw them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he'd said. That's not how it works. Wouldn't work. Getting directions? Using a phone? Finding Pine Street? Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to my computer. I decided to call the number from those flyers, just to see what would happen. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. No greeting, no name, just a beep. I hung up without leaving a message. But about 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" Came the voice through the phone. It was him. The same guy. The same tone. Like he was standing right next to me. I hung up immediately and turned off my phone. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to figure out what was going on, once and for all. I called in sick to work and spent the entire day on Pine Street, watching, waiting. I figured if he was so obsessed with finding the place, maybe he'd eventually show up there. Around 4 p.m., I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the street, next to the big intersection, just standing there, not moving, not looking around, just standing. I watched him for about an hour. He never moved. People walked past him. Cars drove by. Life continued around him, but he just stood there like a statue. Finally, I worked up the courage to approach him. I wanted answers. But as I got closer, I realized something that made my blood freeze. He wasn't alone. There were 3 other people standing with him, spaced out along the sidewalk. A woman in a red coat, an older man in a suit, a young guy in a hoodie. They were all just standing there, perfectly still, staring straight ahead, and they all had the same empty expression on their faces. The same pale, colorless eyes. I stopped about 20 feet away, and that's when the guy in the baseball cap turned to look at me. He smiled that same polite smile. "Excuse me," he called out. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" But we were on Pine Street. We were standing right in the middle of it. The woman in the red coat turned toward me next. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" She asked in the exact same tone. Then the older man. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" Then the young guy. "Do you know how to get Pine Street?" All of them, one after another, asking the same question in the same voice, like they were all reading from the same script. I ran. I turned around and ran as fast as I could, all the way home, not stopping until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me. That was 3 days ago. I haven't left my apartment since. But here's the thing that's really messing with my head. I keep getting phone calls, different numbers, but always the same question. And when I look out my window, I can see people standing on the street corners around my building. Different people. But they're all just standing there, perfectly still, waiting. And yesterday I got a knock on my door. When I looked through the peephole, it was my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chun. Sweet old lady, lived here for 20 years. But when she spoke, her voice sounded wrong. "Excuse me," she said through the door. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" I didn't answer. I just backed away from the door and haven't gone near it since. I don't know what's happening to this neighborhood, or what that place really is, or why these people are so desperate to find it. But I think maybe Pine Street isn't a destination at all. Maybe it's a trap, and maybe everyone who gives directions there gets added to whatever this thing is. Maybe that's how it spreads. I can hear them outside right now, calling up to my window. More voices than before. Dozens of them, all asking the same question, over and over again. "Do you know how to get to Pine Street? Do you know how to get to Pine Street? Do you know how to get to Pine Street?" I think they're waiting for me to answer. I think they're waiting for me to come outside. But I won't. I can't, because I'm starting to forget how to get anywhere else. I've told maybe 2 people about this, and both of them looked at me like I was losing it. Maybe I am, but I need to get this out there, because if something like this has happened to you, I want you to know you're not alone. My name's Finn, I'm 28. Been living in Chicago for about 4 years now. I work tech support for a software company. Nothing fancy, just the kind of job that leaves your brain feeling like mush by 6 p.m. I live in a decent neighborhood, Logan Square, in this converted apartment above a Thai restaurant. It's loud during dinner rush, but the rent's reasonable and I can walk pretty much everywhere I need to go. The thing about city living is you get used to the noise. Sirens, traffic, people yelling at 2 a.m. It all becomes background static after a while. But sometimes when you need to think, you gotta get out and walk. That's what I was doing that Tuesday night in October. I had this project deadline eating at me, and my tiny apartment felt like it was closing in. I figured I'd walk to 7-Eleven 5 blocks down, grab some energy drinks for the all-nighter I was planning, maybe take the long way back. Simple enough, right? I had no idea that those 15 minutes would completely change how I see the world around me. So it's about 11:30 p.m. when I head out. The air had that crisp October bite to it, and the streets were mostly empty except for the occasional Uber picking someone up from bars. I'm wearing my usual jeans hoodie, beat-up Converse that squeak a little when I walk fast on wet pavement. I take my normal route down Fullerton, past the closed storefronts with their security gates pulled down, past the 24-hour laundromat with its weird blue fluorescent lights spilling onto the sidewalk. There's maybe 3 cars that pass me the whole first 5 minutes. Typical Tuesday night, you know? That's when I first noticed it. I'm walking at my usual pace. Not fast, not slow, just that rhythm you fall into when you're lost in thought. But underneath my footsteps, there was something else. Another set of steps, matching mine perfectly. Same cadence, same weight, like someone walking directly behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably just someone else heading the same direction. Maybe someone who got off work late like me. But when I glanced back over my shoulder, the sidewalk behind me was empty. Streetlights illuminating nothing but concrete, and the occasional piece of trash blowing around. Weird, but whatever. Cities play tricks on you sometimes. Sound bounces off buildings funny. I kept walking, but the footsteps kept going too. I started paying closer attention now. My footsteps, tap, tap, tap on the concrete, and underneath, like an echo that was just slightly off, tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm, same interval, but delayed by maybe half a second. I tried something. I stopped walking completely. Right in front of this closed coffee shop with the metal chairs stacked on the tables outside. The footsteps behind me continued for exactly 2 more steps, then stopped. My heart did this little flutter thing, but I told myself it was just my imagination filling in sound that weren't there. You know how when you hear your name being called, but it's just the wind? Same thing. I started walking again. The footsteps started again. I stopped. They continued for 2 beats, then stopped. This happened 3 more times before I reached the intersection of Fullerton and Kimball. Each time, I'd stop, and those phantom footsteps would take 2 more steps before going silent. Like whoever was walking behind me needed a moment to realize I'd stopped. But every time I turned around, nothing, just empty sidewalks stretching back toward my apartment. The thing is, I know this neighborhood. I've walked these streets hundreds of times, at all hours. I know which buildings create echoes. I know where the sound carries weird because of construction or whatever. This wasn't that. This was something else. The 7-Eleven sits on this corner lot. Lots of windows, bright fluorescent lighting that makes everything look harsh and washed out. I could see it from about a block away, this beacon of artificial light in the quiet darkness. As I got closer, the footsteps behind me were getting more pronounced. Not louder exactly, but more present, like whoever was making them was getting closer, even though every time I looked back, there was nobody there. By the time I reached the store entrance, my palms were actually sweating, which was stupid. I mean, what was I afraid of? Some invisible person following me? But my body knew something my brain didn't want to admit yet. I stood in front of those automatic doors for maybe 10 seconds, just listening. My breathing, the hum of the store's AC unit, traffic from the main road a few blocks over. And underneath it all, the soft sound of footsteps on concrete, matching my breathing rhythm now instead of my walking pace. The door slid open with that familiar whoosh sound, and I stepped inside. That's when it happened. I stepped through the entrance. My feet hit the linoleum floor of the store with that slightly different sound, that hollow thud instead of the tap of concrete. But behind me, I heard 2 more taps on concrete, footsteps that crossed the threshold after me, but never made it to the linoleum. I spun around so fast, I knocked over a display of travel-sized snacks near the door. Nothing. Nobody. Just the automatic doors sliding shut behind me. And Carlos, the night shift guy, looking at me from behind the counter with raised eyebrows. "You good, man?" he asked. I must have looked as rattled as I felt, because he actually stood up like he was ready to come check on me. Yeah, fine. I started picking up the scattered snacks, my hands shaking just enough to make the plastic packages crinkle loudly. Just thought I saw something. But I didn't see something. I heard something. Something that followed me right up to the edge of the store and then stopped, like it couldn't come inside. I tried to act normal, browsing the energy drink section, grabbing a couple Red Bulls and some of those terrible for you gas station burritos. But I kept glancing at the windows, trying to see if there was anyone outside. The fluorescent lights made everything beyond the glass look dark and reflective, like trying to look through a funhouse mirror. Carlos rang me up, making small talk about the weather and how dead the neighborhood gets on weeknights. Normal conversation. But it felt surreal, like I was watching someone else have this interaction while I was still back on the sidewalk, listening to those impossible footsteps. "You walking home?" he asked as he bagged my stuff. "Yeah, just a few blocks." "Be careful out there. Weird stuff's been happening in the neighborhood lately." Mrs. Chun from the dry cleaner says people have been following her home from work. Never actually approaches her or anything, just follows. Cops won't do anything because technically no crime's being committed. My blood went cold. Following her how? She says she can hear them walking behind her, but when she looks back, nobody's there. Started about 2 weeks ago. He handed me the bag, shrugged. Probably just paranoid, you know? But still. I thanked him and headed for the door, my mind racing. 2 weeks ago, right around when I first started taking these late-night walks to clear my head, the automatic doors opened, and I stepped back out onto the sidewalk. Immediately I heard them, the footsteps. But this time they weren't behind me. They were next to me. I'm not exaggerating when I say I could hear them clear as day, like someone walking directly beside me on my left. Same pace, same weight, but offset just enough that it wasn't quite in sync with my own steps. I looked to my left. Nothing. But the sound was so clear I could tell what kind of shoes they were wearing. Something with a hard sole, maybe dress shoes or boots. Definitely not sneakers like mine. I started walking faster. The footsteps matched my pace. I slowed down. They slowed down too. This went on for the first block of my walk home. Invisible footsteps keeping perfect pace with me. Close enough that if there had actually been someone there, we would have been bumping shoulders. By the second block, there were footsteps behind me again too. Different rhythm, different weight, like a second person had joined the first. By the third block, I was surrounded by the sound of footsteps. In front, behind, both sides. All perfectly coordinated with my movements. All at slightly different paces. So they created this horrible syncopated rhythm around me. I stopped walking and pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages, but actually turning on the voice recorder. If I was losing my mind, I wanted proof. If I wasn't, well, I wanted proof of that too. When I stopped, all the footsteps continued for different lengths of time. The ones behind me went 2 more steps. Like always, the ones beside me went 3 more steps. The ones in front of me. And this is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. The ones in front of me kept going for 5 more steps. 5 steps away from me. Then they stopped. I stood there on the sidewalk, phone in my hand, surrounded by silence and the distant hum of the city. But now I knew there was something 5 steps ahead of me. Something waiting. I couldn't go forward. I couldn't go back. I just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, trying to figure out what the hell was happening to me. That's when I remembered something Carlos had said. Mrs. Chun from the dry cleaner. People following her, but never approaching. Never actually doing anything, just following. What if it wasn't people? I know how that sounds. I know how insane that sounds. But standing there on Fulton Avenue at 12:15 a.m., surrounded by the sound of footsteps that belonged to no one I could see, insane was starting to feel relative. I started walking again, very slowly. The footsteps resumed their pattern around me, behind, beside, in front. But now I was listening more carefully, and I realized something that made my skin crawl. They weren't random. They were responsive. When I stepped over a crack in the sidewalk, the footsteps beside me would step over it too, a split second later. When I moved slightly to the right to avoid a puddle, the footsteps in front of me would shift right as well, like they were clearing the path for me, like they were learning from me, mimicking me. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now. The footsteps matched me perfectly. That's when I heard the breathing. Not my breathing, other breathing, multiple sources, all around me, all slightly out of sync with each other and with me. Deep, slow breaths, like people who've been walking for a long time and were trying to keep pace with someone younger and faster. The kind of breathing you hear when you're walking with your grandparents, and they're trying not to let on that they're winded, but there was something wrong with it. Something too measured, too artificial, like someone who had heard breathing, but had never actually done it themselves, trying to copy the sound. I broke into a full run. The breathing got heavier, more labored, but it kept up with me. And underneath it, the footsteps were now running too. All around me, a chorus of invisible people sprinting through the empty streets of Chicago. I could hear them hitting puddles, splashing water that I never felt on my legs. I could hear them breathing hard, gasping for air that never seemed to satisfy them. I could hear their clothes rustling, their keys jingling, all the tiny sound that people make when they move through the world. But there was nobody there. I ran the last 2 blocks to my apartment building, fumbling with my keys while the sounds of invisible people catching their breath surrounded me. My hands were shaking so bad, I dropped the keys twice before I managed to get the front door open. I slammed it shut behind me and leaned against it, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. Outside, I could hear them, all of them, walking slowly around my building, circling it. I live on the 2nd floor, and my bedroom window faces the street. I crept over to it and peeked through the blinds. The street looked normal, empty, but I could hear them clear as day. Footsteps on concrete, moving in a slow circle around my building, round and round, like they were patrolling. I grabbed my laptop and Googled, hearing footsteps no one near Chicago. Most of the results were about auditory hallucinations or schizophrenia. But buried on the 3rd page, I found a post on a local Reddit forum from 6 months ago. Has anyone else been hearing people following them at night in Logan Square? I swear I can hear footsteps behind me every time I walk home from work, but when I turn around there's nobody there. Started about 3 weeks ago, getting really freaked out. The post had 12 replies, all of them describing the same thing I had just experienced. Footsteps that matched their pace. Breathing that sounded human but wrong. The sense of being surrounded by people who weren't there. The most recent reply was from a username I recognized, Chef Carlos 2019. Carlos from the 7-Eleven. It's been happening to customers too. Mrs. Chun isn't the only one. Something's wrong in this neighborhood. Started right after they tore down that old apartment building on Kimball, the one that was condemned. I looked up the building he was talking about. It had been demolished 8 weeks ago to make room for luxury condos. Built in 1923, it had been abandoned for 15 years after a fire that killed 11 residents who couldn't escape because the exits had been chained shut by the landlord. The fire happened on a Tuesday night in October, exactly 97 years ago. I'm telling you this story because I need you to know that some things don't stay buried. Some things don't move on when their world gets torn down around them. Those footsteps, they're still there. Every night when I walk home from work, I can hear them. Behind me, beside me, in front of me, getting closer each time. Mrs. Chin stopped coming to work at the dry cleaner. Carlos quit his job at the 7-Eleven. Half the people who replied to that Reddit post have deleted their accounts. But I can't leave. I can't afford to move. And even if I could, I don't think it would matter anymore. I think they've attached themselves to me. To all of us who heard them that first time. Last night, I heard footsteps inside my apartment. They started in the living room around 3 a.m., the same slow, measured pace I'd heard on the street. But this time, they were walking across my hardwood floors, past my couch, into my kitchen. I lay in bed listening to invisible people make themselves at home in my space. Opening my refrigerator, I could hear the door seal breaking, the light coming on, the soft hum of the motor, turning on the faucet, moving chairs around, living the life they never got to finish. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they chose us. But I know they're getting stronger, more solid, more real every day. Tonight, when I go to sleep, I'm going to set up my phone to record audio. Not because I think it will help, but because I want proof of what's happening here. If something happens to me, if I disappear, or worse, I want people to know it wasn't random. I want people to know that when you tear down the places where people died, when you pave over tragedy and build luxury on top of suffering, sometimes the suffering finds a way to continue. Sometimes the dead don't stay dead. They just start walking, and they never, ever stop.